Ahojte moji milí druháci, vítam vás na ďalšej hodine, ktorú máme. Ja mám ešte piatok 12. marca, takže si tradične nahrávam dopredu. Vy Dčkari máte 16. a Cčka, Bčka 18. Takže pôjdeme ďalej v našej téme, čiže taký úvod do stredovekej spoločnosti. Dnes si budeme možno trošku viac hovoriť o tých ľuďoch, ešte o tejto pyramídke to začneme. No tradične ja som vám dal samozrejme nejakú otázku, teraz ešte netuším akú, takže zodpovedali ste už pred hodinou, alebo ešte teraz stále môžete odpovedať, ak ste nestihli. No, ak vás vystrašil tento screenshot, dúfam, že bola to iba chyba na YouTube, ako mi niekto potom písal, že v podstate zobrazuje neskôr, ale prvýkrát sa mi to stalo, čiže ak náhodou, prosím vás niektorí, že by ste odpovedali a potom lážo plážo, mám hodinu voľna, určite nie, je niekoľko možností, buď vám budem dávať otázky aj pomimo, budete si musieť znovu načítavať to video, to v podstate nie je môj problém, alebo naozaj pristúpime k tým testom, čo som spomínal, takže možno niektorí by asi boli radi, že namiesto tých zadaní, ktoré máte naozaj veľa sú náročné, ale taká je naša škola, v podstate cesta k dokonalosti vedie údolím utrpenia, berte to tak s nadsázkou, ale snaha je tá, aby ste boli výborne pripravení na vysoké školy, kdekoľvek, čo si vyberiete. História, či vás baví, či vás nebaví, tak v podstate to patrí k všeobecným znalostiam, to je ako biológia, chémia, matika či fyzika. Sami viete, že ak sa poriadne neučí napríklad matematika alebo iný predmet, tak jednoducho máte s tým ťažkosti, problémy. Takže toto je na vás, aby ste si rozobrali možno tie poznámky a veci, ktoré tu máte, aby ste si ich rozobrali možno na nejakým spôsobom na viacej času a urobili si to v podstate podľa svojho. Ďakujem, žena mi donesla brokolicu, asi mi chce niečo naznačiť. Dobre, ok, decka, takže poďme na to. So where have we finished? I tried to open this. Okay, you cannot see again, so maybe I will just leave it smaller. Previous lesson we were talking about some basic periodization, milestones, how we divide various periods that you have to write in. You also have a big task about drawing this pyramid and some people, or at least characters with some shovel or whatever, or with some mace or a sword. And the point where I finished was this clergy, and I have already talked about nobility and peasants. Last thing I didn't talk about was town. Town folks or towns had been there before, of course. If you remember from Roman times, we had these castrums, these military camps, but also big cities. And just like Rome, Ravenna, Constantinople, we had also town cities in Mesopotamia, so it's no problem. But this is something different, and I will explain you later on what was the point. Free towns, free cities were something different. They were something like not part of this feudal society, where you had people who have land and people who had to work on some other's land, as for the protection, for the fief, čiže za to feudum, za to léno. On the other hand, it is approved by nobility, by clergy. So we have this church, pope, bishops, and so on. But now towns were somehow, by kings usually, they were somehow withdrawn from this feudal society, and they were proclaimed like free places. So people who settled in these towns, so they were proclaimed free. And it's interesting when we talk about like modern human rights, it was not like that. But it meant that you were not vassal of any of these guys, of dukes, princes, earls, barons, or bishops, or clergy. The only lord of the town was a king, or in case of Germany, the emperor, or in case of Italy, nobody. Because these towns were so strong, so powerful, they could defend their independence. And the towns were working just like ancient Roman republic. So those rich ones, like patricians, we can actually use this word even for medieval burghers. So I mean people living in the cities who were rich, and they were electing their representatives for a council, for a town senate. They called it concilium civitas. So the city council, city hall. There were 12 people, and from these 12 people, these rich like lords of the town, they elected for 1 year one guy who was the mayor of the town. So even you have hierarchy of the medieval towns of people who paid taxes only to the queen or only to the king, but they were free. They could do whatever they wanted. Of course, they had some medieval law, and because there was tradition of this republic and Italy and Germany, so usually they were using this Roman ancient law. So people were actually free. They were no slaves, they were not serfs, and you could be either poor or rich, and that was the power and political rights if you had. Usually, as I said, so people who settled in towns were officially free, so free citizens. Still, if you were a poor miner, servant, guy working in some workshop, in some guild, you had no political rights. You needed to be a rich guy. So, for example, craftsman, guild master, I don't know, some merchant, for example. And these guys are called, even in English, from German word Burger. So, burgers, it means mešťania. So mešťania, it means usually like rich citizens of the towns, and burger houses, mešťanské domy, and so on. So these guys had to have some house and had to have some money. Every town had different conditions how to become, a burger. And those burgers were electing 12 representatives sitting in the city council, and they were called councillors. Po slovensky budeme o nich hovoriť konšeli, so this is interesting thing. And from among them, they elected one guy who was the main judge. Yeah, he was a judge for all the town, representing town law code, and even settling up all the arguments, all the trials, and so on. That's why in German he was called Richter. Okay, for the English it is mayor, which means like steward, sprouts, or something like that, like general guy. Okay, I think that's it pretty enough from what we have in here. So let's move to the other slide. I check up, okay, we don't miss anything. Feudal society in here, so when we speak more generally about nobility, so you know that I told you that the king was the main lord, main noble lord. Noble, it means actually like honorable, like the guy who you should admire, and respect and obey. And all people, including nobility, were the subjects of the king. Subject generally means poddaný, so the vassal. And everybody who is in the hierarchy in the pyramid below the king, he is his subject. So you can be as a peasant subject to the lord, to the landlord, but even landlord is subject to the king. And king can be in Germany the subject of the emperor. So it's interesting. And as I said, between 8th and 9th century, when this system appeared, this feudal system, he proclaimed with the support of the church, of the bishop, of the pope, that you are the lord of all the land. Of course, he cannot do like farm all the land, so his land was his property, but he donated it to his soldiers with his conquered lands. Usually his soldiers were horsemen, sometimes with sword, with a spear, and that's why they were called knights or chevalier in French, which means like horse riders. Okay, if you have a horse, and even if you have a sword, probably you're a rich man, you have like some more soldiers, footmen, some infantry, and so on. In this case, you probably have right to be given some reward because you supported like Alfred the Great, King of Essex, Prince of Great Moravia Svetopulk, or King of Hungary Stephen the Saint. And in this way they gave you as a reward his land. Sometimes with villages, sometimes without villages, you have to settle them with people and invite them, Generally we call these people noblemen, so šľachta, šľachtici, all lords, ako páni, zemepáni. So as I said, lords usually gives fiefs, which is kind of grand land to the others. So you can, even princes could give it to barons and knights, okay? And in Slovak, this land grant is called leno. Keď dostanete niečo do lena, dostanete nejaký majetok, nejakú pôdu do užívania. Of course, you have to pay some rent. In Latin, this leno or land grant, or in English called fief, is called feudum, and that's why it is explanation. So you have to be sure you know this terminology, these terms. And of course, as a rent, sometimes you have to pay some gold, but usually it was for the services as military. So if you were using these villages and land, you had to build up some small army, at least a battle group, battalion, okay, and bring it to the battle when the king just summoned you, called to arms for the battle against your enemies. Of course, you needed to persuade peasants that you are there for their own good, so they were not rebelling. So usually they were also representing, I mean, these noblemen were representing the law code of the kingdom. In case of Great Moravia, Zákon Sudný ľudem. That was a law code of Great Moravia. Similar was also law code of Stephen the Saint. And that's why these guys were representing what to do, how to punish some criminal for a murder, for a theft, for example, how to, I don't know, divorces were not possible, but I don't know, there were some punishments, how to settle them down. And that's why these guys were also judges, and that's why they were having swords as a symbol of their power and of the law that is bring. So usually they were not only for like oppressing peasants, but usually they were there for making peasants safe. Okay, and usually it was working at the beginning. At the end of Middle Ages, not very much. Generally, we call them also vassals, so people who receive fiefs, landholders in Slovak. Nice translation is zemepan. So this is the lord of the land, lord of the feudum, lenní páni, aj takto ich nazývame. Of course, they had to pay oath of loyalty, because without symbolical, representative, right ceremony in which you pay oath of loyalty to your lord, to the king, so probably you are not obliged to follow that. Of course, you had to send soldiers to the royal army, and as you will realize, especially in our history of Hungarian kingdom, they were not obeying very much, and very often our kingdom was actually destroyed partially by Ottomans or conquered by Austrians, because landlords just were not obeying. Only towns were sending soldiers, and some made minor lords. Sometimes they had to pay taxes, but this was not the case of, for example, our kingdom, because we had a special treaty with the king called the Golden Bull of Andrew II, Zlatá bula Ondreja II, from 1222, in which the king promised, was forced to give this privilege and not to pay taxes. We and a couple of kingdoms, maybe Poland, didn't have to pay taxes, but in Germany, in France, even in England, they had to pay taxes. And how to get money? From the work of their peasants. But of course, something efficient, and that was a bit different. Generally, we divide nobility into high nobles or low nobles. High nobility were dukes, princes, archdukes, grand princes, and so on, čiže poslovenský vojvodovia, vojvodcovia, kniežatá napríklad. Low nobility were knights, barons, earls, čiže rytieri, baroni a doslova grofy. Earl, you may know, it's from jarl, that is Anglo-Saxon and even Viking or Nordic name for chieftain. So these guys could be, like, let's say in Great Moravia, some vladikovia, and these guys could be like župani and kniežata and so on. Okay, couple of pictures, maybe about clothing. Here there are also some peasants, as I can see during the history, in the timeline, upcoming to early modern period. This is evolution of some swords. If you are interested, Matej Moc can give you a lot of information. His father is the best swords maker in Slovakia, and this is evolution of nobility, of clothing from early, like late 11th century, 1400s and 1500s, and the last one is 1550, so already period of William Shakespeare. That is supposed to be already early modern period. And if you ask Vojto Ilčík to play you some song with accordion, mind this cartoon. Okay, actually they were laughing about this. Okay, what about peasant, serfs, and free peasant? It's pretty easy, because not many things to tell about them. Majority of people were peasants, rolníci, and most peasants were serfs. As you can see, we don't change this F into VE as walls or knives, but serfs, it means these subjected peasants who couldn't move from one place to another because they're lawfully bounded to the place of birth. You find yourself a girlfriend from Teco and you are from Hont, no chance, because your landlords wouldn't allow this girl to move to another place, because she will give birth to 10 more peasants in 20 years, so this was really difficult for them. They were not slaves, but they actually what they produced belonged to their lord. Of course, if the lord was not stupid, he left something to them. So sometimes there were some accounts that how much food, how much kind can lords take from their peasant. That was case of England when William the Conqueror, this Norman king, great Norman king, divided his kingdom among his Norman knights. But firstly, he asked them to count how many people are living in their realm and what is the production. Because when you're living in the mountains with no resources, with no wood, with only pastures, you cannot ask them for timber. If you don't have pastures because there are a lot of rocks, you probably don't ask for sheep and meat and cheese. The same thing if they live next to the, I don't know, iron mine. So it's logical that you would rather ask for iron than for, I don't know, wheat or barley. So that was interesting. Of course, in late Middle Ages, in case of our kingdom, that was pretty bad, and there were many peasants' rebellion. The most infamous was rebellion 1514 of George Doja, or Juraj Doja. Well, like hundred thousands of peasants rather fought against nobility, and the leader Juraj Doja, he was like tortured and executed in such terrible way that I use it as a picture in my history class room for you to warn you from not making like mass in my class. Okay, I believe that you are not afraid of me. It doesn't seem very true. Okay, still some at the beginning, most of the peasants were free men, but even they were gradually bounded to the land and became serfs. Nazývame ich u nás slobodníci, for example, Janoši, he was from some of these like slobodníci, like free man family, and they were wearing actually a earring as a symbol that they were free. See that he also went to become a brigand. They had to pay with food, of course. They were if they were miners, they didn't have anything to pay with, and even when they were miners, so very quickly it became a town, mining town, and it was a different thing. And in case of need, they provided army with light infantry, sometimes as a spearman in a front line, or just like to help to scare the enemy that with large numbers, or sometimes like sling shooters, čiže brakovníci. But it was not very common. Middle Ages, they didn't rely on them, and they were supposed to be like not very important. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of pictures. Actually, I added many pictures to this presentation because I realized that it's pretty boring, only writing. So let me show you some of them. Okay, peasants working in the fields, yeah, doing some harvest with sickles, and yeah, the landlord showing what they have to. So probably they're working in what in Latin is called the dominical, which is like lord's land. Because even as a freeman, they had their own land, which is called rustical in Latin, and they had many days that they had to work there. Only in the 18th century, Teresa, our queen and empress, issued this urbarium or Theresian urbarium that was actually a code and kind of regulation for the nobleman that how many days their peasants, their serfs, can work on their fields, on the nobleman's fields, not on their own. So they had enough time to work on their own fields and feed their own children, not to die because it was not happening. So it's a myth that Maria Teresa abolished serfdom, čiže nevoľníctvo, she didn't, she only regulated it. But her son, Joseph II, he did. Imagine that 230 years ago, they were still uh, your ancestors that were like the property of the landlord. Again, after the death of Joseph II, they came back and again they became like serfs. So even like 170 years ago, your great parents, grandparents were actually the officially the property of some landlords from Palfi or I don't know, Dotsi family or something like that. What I told you also how they were farming, this nice example of the system I wanted to show you, and also is dividing three periods of Middle Ages according to the type of farming: one field, two field, and three field farming. This is actually example of three field that you have, for example, a castle, a village, some orchard, and you have three parts of the land. One is planted or harvested, and one is fallow, to znamená úhor. So you just let it be for all the year. So in this way, this famous picture, you have one field that is being planted right now, one, sorry, that had been already harvested, and one that is left for all the year. So the green grass is growing, animals can like be on a pasture and fertilize it. This is another plan, but actually the same, field one, field two, and this is how they use it, because even during this one planted, one harvested, it's a difference that what type of plant or crop you grow there, you plant. So this is the thing that some of them can grow pretty soon in the spring, like radish, okay, or broccoli, for example. What I have this in here, and uh, then you have, for example, wheat that's harvested in August, sometimes it's September. So also this table, you cannot see it, but it's division how during 3 years, how this fall, spring, and fallow field, what is being like planted and grown in here, even for people and even for horses, for example, for cattle, because not all the things could be like this. Okay, so this is another picture, but you cannot see it. Okay, let's talk about nobility in here. And usual place, if I ask you, so where did nobility live? If you say Castile mentioned, that's like modern period, early modern period. But in Middle Ages, castles, of course. But this is something that I wanted to show you is the evolution of castles. First, I show you one primary school project that I found, but it's really interesting and nice pictures. How from simple fortified villages with a moat, či priekopa, with a simple wooden fortification and some bridge, but later on even another moat was added, and that was a tower with for a lord. In England, they were Norman knights who conquered these Anglo-Saxon kingdoms and created England. And they want to defend themselves from rebelling peasants. You know the stories of Robin Hood. You know that was combination of these Anglo-Saxon peasants and the Norman French-speaking knights. You know the lords. Gradually, also to conquer the land and other lands around, let's say in Wales. That's why in Cardiff they built stone castles, because they were much more resilient to the rebels. And this is like 12th century Norman keep and curtain walls of stone walls. So again, like much better, much more evolved. Later on, nobility started to fight each other, and even Game of Thrones TV show was inspired by real War of the Roses, as I told you, the Battle of Bosworth, and that's why they had need to build even bigger castles that provide not only enough comfort and space for family of the nobleman, but also for all the soldiers, all the garrison, Posadka. So that's why these castles, 14th century already, are much bigger with a lot of towers around and huge moat filled up with water around. So these are nice examples. Still, there were also low nobility that couldn't afford to build these huge castles, so some of them they were happy only to fortify their courtyard or with their houses and with the stables and so on. And some of these small mansions or manor houses were in here. Manor house, tiež ak niekde nájdete preklad zo slovenčiny, že kaštiel, nie je to celkom pravda, ale my máme na to parádne slovo a to je, že kúria, zemianská kúria alebo opevnený dvorec. And we have plenty of them. Of course, most of them is not destroyed because even the walls were not so strong, but still there were castles for low nobility. Okay, let it be. Pozriem sa, ako mám čas. Dobre, paráda, 23 minút. So let's have a look at some other castles. So what I've shown you in this picture, it's evolution of like simple towers, sometimes on a hill called moat, fortified with palisade, as we know, wooden palisade, and divided. Later on, fortified towers, sometimes with stone and stairway, not to heaven but to the gate, so easily defended, and later on fortified with stone walls, but finally to even to chateaus, that is already zamok, not a castle at all, so really the big ones. Here in Slovakia, I would definitely show you some villages of Slavic people in early Middle Ages. They were just fortified. This is something you could see any. This is obviously Slavic one, and maybe here in a higher position there should be maybe chieftain or elders of the tribe. Later on, because you know Romans and Roman Empire fell down, great migration came, and many of these tribes and kingdoms were inspired by Roman even fortifications. So just like in this Limes Romanus, So they start to add these towers, so for better protection. So in this case, even Slavic, this is actually Modra near Bratislava. They're like rampart, Slavic rampart, či hradisko. You see that's not only palisade, but even some towers around. So it looked like more like this. This may be familiar for those who are from Zvolen because this is rampart or hill fort Motyova. So here on the hill above Motyova, there was this big Slavic rampart with a house for chieftain, for Vladika, some prince maybe, and fortification around, but wooden one with towers. So this is actually first step of evolution. But when Kingdom of Hungary was created, we are already in High Middle Ages, most of the castles were actually a bit bigger, but not very different. So this is, for example, former castle of Vyšehrad, about Turiec, and Horná Nitra region, just in these mountains of called Giar, not Giar nad Hronom, that's different. And this is how castles, let's say in the 11th century, looked like in Hungary. So wooden tower, wooden palisade, some bridge, and even some fortified part for not villagers but the servants and uh, some apprentices working in the castle. But when in this High Middle Ages came, so there was Mongolian invasion. For them, it was so easy to shoot these fire arrows on this castle and burn it down. So that's why they start to change it to wood, not from wood to stone fortification. And this is a nice example of similar castle, but a bit different place called Liptov. Liptovsky Hrad is now like nice place with overview. There is no even fortification basement, and this reconstruction from this dwarf digital that I use some of the pictures. The others are from hradiska.sk. I had to actually enlist them in the list of literature and use sources. And this reconstruction how it looked like. So you see that there were some towers, but already with made of stone, and there was wood only in the top, and some fortified parts gradually as they were adding more and more parts. But also there are some wooden bridges easy to break down in case enemy would attack it. Matej Korvin actually destroyed his castle that is 15th century because they were brethren brigand army. That is interesting story that I will show you. So again, we have this evolution from the simple like 10th century modes to let's say 12th, and this is already 15th century. Huge castles in Wales, for example. So in this way, again, you have even divisions, so it's very easy to find them, and this is how it look like. This is typical for England and so on. This can be actually easily spotted anywhere in Europe, and this is a small manor house with small fortification. It can be even in the town in Banská Štiavnica when there is this crystal or Karling Hotel, so they used to be kind of similar but much bigger. Rubigalovsky Majer. Very often the Majere Kurie, they were fortified. Yeah. Okay, Gothic style. Later on, they start to add like towers and more buildings, and very often these castles were not with four towers, but with only one tower or two towers. And after 100 years, they added more and more. So this is another phase of evolution, let's say 13th century, anywhere in Europe. And here you got finally, like for big castle, maybe for a king, let's say, 11th century, but four towers and a really big one. This is called donjon type of tower that is high but also provide enough space for nobility, for some administration. This is maybe chapel and a place for noble family, but again staircase. Nice example of this donjon or Norman, first early Norman type of castle is this one, and probably you all know that it's the castle called the Tower in London. And as you can see that this inner part is like 11th century donjon of William the Conqueror. Only later they added more and more fortification, built it like palaces around. So it is combination of various styles. Okay, even so many things that this is. I found this crazy picture. This is actually puzzle, but showing like what can be there in a castle from various things like night in here and staircases and people feasting and some torture rooms and hall room and music hall and some chapel in here, and of course like this home for the noble family, some soldiers guard on the guard, some feast in here, kitchen, game board games, okay, wine cellars, ladies chambers, community, okay, bedroom, of course, and again soldiers. So interesting, it's funny, but it is like this castle, maybe again 13th century, really big one with all the places that you need to have. Later on in Gothic style, they start to try to build these castles up with these like round shaped roundels, and typical for Gothic architecture from Romanesque huge castles to like Gothic that going to the top more like this. Building Barbakan, in Banska Bystrica, Barbakan is like front fortress that is specially built like in front to protect the bridge. So this is different. Okay, so again, evolution, as you can see, even coming to already early modern period with bastions that are very different because there are already cannons and fire guns used. So it was, if you shoot a cannonball to this kind of castle, it would just fall down. That's why these castles needed to be besieged by another walls with a lot of earth, because earth can just swallow the cannonball. They don't destroy stone wall, but also you can shoot from musketeers, old rifles to the other places from fortification. So it's really interesting evolution of the castles. And many people build castles, like not only kings and nobility, but this is Salzburg. Hohensalzburg is upper castle of Salzburg, and this is the seat of the Archbishop of Salzburg. This castle was built by Archbishop for himself. As I told you that there were actually many states, let's say in Germany, it was typical, one third of the states were so-called ecclesiastical states, that the lord was not prince or duke, but the bishop or abbot. And Salzburg, Regensburg, Mainz, Köln am Rhein, and Trier, all these the whole countries were actually ruled by bishops, and they had their own armies in here, like this case. So a big, really big castle. Also from France, Mont Saint Michel is actually a town that belongs to the abbot of the abbey, to opatstvo, and they decided that this fisherman village on this hill, it's a good place because very often England and France were fighting, so it would be cool to build like castle to protect the abbey and the abbot on the hill. So not only big church but also fortification around. So you see that there were many people fighting. This is the biggest castle in the world, biggest medieval Christian European castle that is in Syria in Asia. Crac de Chevalier was built by Templar knights during the Crusades to protect these lands because they didn't have enough men, so they had to build huge fortifications. Marquap or Crac de Chevalier is still there, and civil war in Syria that started like 10 years ago. So actually, some of the first battles and clashes between governmental forces and rebels were held even in here, and still the castle is standing because such huge, thick walls could stood even the hand grenades and so on. Okay, similar of this huge castle is only small extract from it. Try to guess what castle is it. This reconstruction made by actually Hungarians, and it is Castle of Spiš. And it's true how huge it was. Another one company sells these postcards that they reconstruct this how it looked like actually, because we see only the ruins, most of the part. Even like castles that we have preserved, like Orava Castle, is beautiful. They're pretty rare because most of the castles were destroyed during the history, and especially in our country during rebellions anti-Habsburgs in early modern period. And there was order from the emperor that every castle had to be filled up with explosives and had to be blown up, not to be used by rebels again. And Orava, together with a couple of really few castles, several castles in Slovakia, was lucky not to be destroyed. That was not destroyed. So that's why even you have these parts of medieval castle of like 12th, 13th century, 15th century, and this lower part is actually from Baroque, almost Baroque period, so like 16th and 17th century already. So this nice place, actually I walk all the mountains above in here, Kubinska Hola. Try to guess what castle is this one. If those, I think many of you are from Horná Nitra and from Prievidza, Handlova and Bojnice. This is Bojnice castle before its reconstruction, because in 19th century factories were already there, locomotives, railways, and airplanes were being built. And some people felt nostalgia that we don't have these castles. They are either destroyed or they're just simple like this. And in France, they could see some castles like in Avignon and Loire River. So they've started to repeat it. And there was a new fashion how to build castle in a new kind of fairy tale style. This tiež knieža, Count Palfi, fell in love with some French lady, and he wanted to persuade to move to Bojnice. So he rebuilt completely this castle in this kind of Disney Gothic French style that is actually very fake for our region. No castles look like this. French, even many castles in Germany and France were actually only uh, pseudo, yes, this is a good word, pseudo Gothic, that people thought that they may have looked like this. Actually, they didn't, but still, there were actually many castles that looked really beautiful. You think they're historically nice and valuable are not. It is fake. It is like today when I build a castle with bricks and with concrete, modern concrete style, fill up with electric lights, and this is the thing. So Bojnice, despite popularity, they are not like this. So probably the most famous example is this castle. Probably know it from Bavaria, Neuschwanstein. Bavarian king at the time was really a crazy guy who believed in like he liked reading fairy tales and ghost stories, and he was really an eccentric guy and decided to build like kind of this fairy tale castle. And this is not even a gothic or any style. Some may call it secession, but it's like kitsch because it likes to be pretty. It's not functional. Yeah, nature is beautiful and castle looks amazing for Walt Disney. And if you're angry like Walt Disney, what that to be? I can tell you the Neuschwanstein Bojnice were built in 1910s, and Walt Disney Castle was built in 1930s, 1940s. What is the difference? In Walt Disney Castle in Los Angeles can be, and San Diego, whatever Disneyland is, can be similar. So yeah, this is not a castle. This is a castle. This is history. This is what I want to show you. And this is a castle. Actually, this is a place from the village near Banská Štiavnica Podhorie. And when I told you that many castles were destroyed, even in Middle Ages, because they were either abandoned, they were not used. Many castles were abandoned by their lords because they moved in times of peace to the next to the village, built a beautiful mansion, Kastil, and they left these castles in ruins. Many castles were blown up by this imperial army. So this is actually castle, but people know archaeologists can excavate at least the a basic line of fortification, and this is reconstruction how probably the castle may have looked like. So it's a very big difference. So if we counted all the castles in Slovakia, that would be about 1000, but unfortunately they're not castles anymore. They are just ruins or holes in the ground as this one, just like this castle that I wanted to show you, which is Castle Sitno. And you remember maybe from Bronze Age period how it looked like. And this is reconstruction. Compare it. It's incredible. And this castle was just blown up. So only this rock remained with couple of basements, from the towers. But this is also archaeologists trying to reconstruct it. So that was really pity we don't have it anymore. Let's move to medieval towns because this is another place. So I told you another city, actually, example of these fake historical buildings is this famous city in France called Carcassonne, which had beautiful medieval center. But in 19th century, they decided to build it again because it was destroyed. During the 20th century, during the Second World War, German Luftwaffe, German Air Force, just bombed this medieval town. So French built it again in 1950s. And here in the town, in all the streets, there are shops not with clothes but with medieval swords and so on. And even there is board game called Carcassonne. You may know it from there, but it's fake. Which is not fake? What is not fake? Medieval towns were built in three types. First, on the ruins of Roman towns, of these castrums, Mancastrum, Castrum built on the River Man, Manchester, Vindobona, Colonia, Aquincum, all these towns, especially big cities. The Romans were really excellent in picking up the place, usually where two rivers were meeting, when there was a possibility to cross the river, for example, or there was some hills or resources nearby, or they were just big trade routes like the Amber Route, Jantarova Cesta, that were actually good place to build it. So this is nice nice example. Then later on in Middle Ages, another crossroads of new trade routes. Bratislava, Košice, Venice, Prague itself, where all these towns were not built by Romans, but in Middle Ages again they became very important crossroads for merchants and tradesmen. Some places, some towns were built on very bad places for those who don't like hiking, like Banska Štiavnica. High in the mountains, in the hills, in the hilly terrain, nobody would ever live there apart from me and some crazy hikers and rock climbers, mountaineers. But there were the richest supplies of gold and silver in Europe and maybe in the world of those times. We cannot compare it. So at resources, you have similar case of Banska Bystrica, which is town in the middle of a region with a lot of villages that there were copper mines. Tajo, Kordíky, Špania Dolina, Lubietova, I don't know. There were many of them. There were many of them, and so the town could be built just in the middle. Krakow was interesting because nearby there were salt mines in Wieliczka. So Krakow became very important town. Rome, if you remember, I told you they were salty marshes. So they used the salt and they could extract it and sell it. And this was the power of the Kingdom of Poland or ancient Rome. Still, you have some towns, medieval towns, built in the middle of fields. And this is case of big plains. There are not big rivers nearby, and just a lot of these farmers and peasants just needed other goods and products. Where can you get it? You need a place, a village that is given privilege from the king to organize a fair. Čiže trh. Once a week, let's say on Saturday in case of Rimavská sobota, or on Wednesday in case of Dunajská streda, Duna Sereda, in which they can organize fair. And at the day, all the farmers come with the stock, with the crops, with the cattle, and they can just sell it. And for the money, they can buy, I don't know, tools. They can buy some supplies and food and clothes and shoes and whatever. What means that this town, not only to organize fair, they need to have guilds. We guild je cech, and this is organization that gathers craftsmen of one craft. Shoemakers, they have to process skins, so they have one guild. Then there are carpenters, they have one guild in the town because they protect themselves from concurrence from other towns and so on. So suddenly from these towns like Spišský štvrtok, Dunajská Streda, Rimavská Sobota, beautiful examples of, I would call it like agricultural towns, medieval towns, only for marketplace and only to organize fair. So nice examples. First medieval cities emerged in Italy in the 11th century, and what I told you that they were towns that actually survived the fall of Western Roman Empire, survived invasions of Ostrogoths, of Arabs, of Vikings, for example. And in this period between 9th and 11th century, Florence, Venice, and Genoa, they could defend themselves from the attacks of either Pope in the south or German Emperor from the north. What made them that they could actually have their own system of government that they uh, ancestors had been used to, and that was a republic. So these towns, because it was small polis, community, so they could elect these guys. Sorry for drill, we have some reconstruction in the block of flats, so I believe it's not disturbing you. And these towns, they created this like republic, city republic, in which they elected only those rich ones. Burghers could elect their representatives. Condottiere in Florence, in Venice, that was Doja. In Genoa, I don't know what was, maybe also condottieri. And these were like elected commanders, judges, mayors, just like in Roman Republic. And these republics became actually very powerful because they were very rich thanks to trade with Byzantine Empire, trade with Asia, for example, or with the German cities in Baltic Sea. They were really rich, and thus they could afford to build weapons and even modern weapons like crossbows. The best crossbowmen were always from the towns. Banska Štrenica, Banska Bystrica provided crossbowmen troops for the king's army because even nobility couldn't afford to build these really complicated weapons, kuše. Okay, what else? So, as I said, the medieval towns were independent from nobility. So, the only lord of the town was the king, or later on queen, and he or she bestowed them with privileges. That was usually a document in which there were some rights that people of the town can use, and it was very different from nobility or from peasants they could use. First right, main right for every city, every town was right to organize fair, čiže právo organizovať trh. The other was the right to pay, to ask to pay the toll. Toll znamená clo alebo mýto, čiže právo mýta was that if when you enter the town you want to use this freedom and free business, you have to pay some entrance fee. For example, mining towns in central Slovakia had right that citizens, people, burghers from Banská Štiavnica have right not to pay toll in all the kingdom. And later on, Banská Bystrica was given the same privilege. So that was interesting in here. Then main right was to build fortification. That was something that, when village has fortification, landlord cannot just come and take the taxes, collect the taxes. If they have fortification, it's not against Mongols or enemies from England. It is against their own landlords. So it means that the town falls, town people can defend their domain against landlords. I can give you example again from Banská Štiavnica, because Banská Štiavnica, when it was proclaimed free city, they were also given a couple of villages in its vicinity, in the surroundings, and some of them were gradually or regularly under attacks of the landlords from surrounding castles, from Šášov, from Revište, from Čabrať, and these guys were attacking and burning down villages, taking people to captivity. And actually, a couple of villages were destroyed already in 14th century. Rumplovská, Hadova. They used to be big villages in Middle Ages next to Banská Štiavnica, but they just don't exist anymore. Some of them, like Hodruša or Banská Bela or Svätý Anton, had to be actually also fortified and protected by army men, by mercenaries, žoldnieri from Banská Štiavnica, and they were paid with gold from mines in here. So the other very important law was to have the right to have their own jurisdiction, which means to have their own city council and right to elect their Richter, their mayor, who was the main judge. There were specific medieval laws. What we used in our towns was developed from Bohemian, that's Czech, and from German law. And this German law was developed from Roman law. So this was combination of all these styles, but there is some like rights to have like attorney at the trial that you can defend. Or for example, first you need to prove that something had some criminal happened. You need to have evidence or a witness. Okay, you cannot torture the others. That was much later. Then there were some like specific privileges, like the right to have mint in your town. Not only Kremnica, mincelnia, mint, but even Bratislava, Nitra, Banská Štiavnica had two mints, but the only one that survived in Slovakia was this in Kremnica. So really famous, 700 years old. In 2 years, yeah, they will celebrate in a couple of years. Right of sword, pravo meča. This is really my popular because it was kind of like ultimate law that town had to have. That king relied on the law code of the town and all the jurisdictional procedures that they can find criminal or a witch, so they can execute him, because the right of execution was only in the hands of the king and nobility, nobody else. They were the judges and executioners. But towns like Banská Štiavnica or Levoča, Bratislava, Nitra, they had right of sword. It means that they could have their own town's executioner. This right of sword was really only for big towns, so that's why it's only Bratislava, Nitra, for example, Trnava. In eastern Slovakia, only for 5 central eastern Slovakian towns and 16 villages and towns of Spiš. And here in central Slovakia, only Banská Štiavnica was given this right. No Žilina, Martin, for example, they didn't have this right. Krupina. In Krupina, they had a witchcraft trial in 18th century. They had to pay a lot of money to Banská Štiavnica to lend them our executioner from Štiavnica, who was torturing these poor women, and he killed them like in the end. Banská Bystrica was given privileges in 1255, and it was mentioned that you are be given our guests from Bania as the same privileges as for many years our guests from Banska Štiavnica, from Bania have been using. So it means they also inherited this right of sword. Both swords can be seen, one in the old castle in Štiavnica, in Himmelreich Tower, and the other in Stredoslovenské muzeum Bystrica in Turzov Dome. Okay, what else? Free election of councillors and a mayor. So this logical because of this jurisdiction. Okay, I need to check the time, guys, because I'm not sure. Okay, 10 minutes, perfect. Because I believe we will come to the end of this presentation, but I have to move it a bit. I believe it was somewhere in here. No, later on, further on. No, towns. I need to expand also. This is part. Okay. So that was the one. So very quickly, let's move on. What else? Towns had to pay taxes. For example, in mining towns, there was urbura. Urbura was a mining tax that 1/7 of all exploited gold and silver must be given to the king or to his earl, chamber earl, because mining chamber was kind of ministry of economy. And usually these chamber earls dwelled in castles, in Glanzenberg Castle, in here in Banska Štiavnica. After its destruction, it was in Kammerhof, that was kind of a palace or buildings for him. From this, is king had enough money for that, and also towns provided troops for the royal army. And as I said, because their power depended not on church or some rebellions, their power depended on the king's decision, who gave them freedom. So that's why they were all the time backbone of the power of the kings or queens. Okay. So that was interesting, I believe. People living in town. Citizens were merchants, craftsmen, remeselníci, workers, in case of Štiavnica, Bystrica, miners, servants, and the poor. The poor znamená chudobní s mäkkými, že tí chudobní obyvateľia. Beggars, for example, prostitutes, and so on, like poor people. The rich citizens were called patricians or burghers, že to je z Nemecko burg, which means castle or town, mešťania. They elected town council, who were councillors. Slovenčina krásne slovo z latičiny konšeli, and the mayor, in case of our, again from Germany, Richter, či sudca, who was also a judge, obviously. Craftsmen were organized in organizations called guilds, which we called cechy. Cechmeister, the guildmaster, journeyman, tovariš, apprentices, tiež tovariši, were actually kind of like hierarchy even in their craft, that you have to learn many things first to clean, the workshop, then to learn some basic stuff, then to make some pair of shoes, then you have to go away and you have to spend on travels like 2 or 3 years. You have to find yourself a job in another guild, in another, not even town, sometimes in different country, to know languages, to know new procedures, new technologies, and come back to your hometown with 2 diplomas that you passed some, that you made some great shoes, and again you had to make excellent boots, for example, and then you are introduced among the journeymen and guild masters of your guild. Usually their guilds didn't protect their occupation against concurrents in the towns, but also against other ethnic groups. Usually those guilds were only German. Later on, they had to open downs even for guilds that use, for example, Slovak language, and here in Slovakia since 17th, 19th century, between this even Hungarian, Magyar speaking guilds. So let's say butchers, remesiari, there were 3 or 5 guilds only in Banska Štiavnica. The 2 were Germans, 2 were Slovak, and 1 was Hungarian. So that is 18th century. Sometimes these towns didn't have a lot of power, like didn't have any authority about themselves. The kings were weak, or emperors were not present in empire in Germany. So to defend against their enemies from surroundings, they start to organized themselves in alliances. This was example of mining towns, 7 mining towns, Montapolitana in central Slovakia, 5 eastern Slovakian towns called Pentapolitana, ports in the Baltic Sea, here it is behind my head. They call themselves the Hanseatic League or the League of Hansa. The only point was that they could freely trade among each other, not paying toll. European Union in Middle Ages was in Baltic Sea between Latvia, Finland, Lithuania, Poland, Sweden, Danish, Norway, German towns, Belgian towns, even in England. So that was really huge, about 150 towns in here. I looked for many pictures. This is the one that is also in the presentation that you know, but also added some of more of them. This is Bardio, great example, because we have executioner in here, we have burger houses in Renaissance Gothic style, we have a church in beautiful Gothic style, and we have a city hall that is very precious and nice. Okay, what else? Scene from crowded marketplace in some town, whatever, Germany, France, it could be anywhere of Western Europe. City hall or council, town council, even with the coats of arms of some of rich burghers in here. Some of them maybe beer maker, maybe this guy was a blacksmith, for example. So they had to be really rich. You have also coats of arms of Arias from, these are not Freemasons, Slobodny Murare, but they are architects. This is actually beginnings of it. From physicians, so doctors, to bakers and blacksmiths and whatever in here, barbers. So interesting stuff. This is how it may look like. So nice carved picture of shoemakers that I was talking about. Some of the towns next to the big rivers or seas were important harbors. So this is seen, could be possibly from Venice or any of these Hanseatic towns like Lübeck or Hamburg. Okay, this is another town. Sometimes they traded with lands that were really far away, and this is actually the Kremlin in Moscow, in Muscovite Grand Duchy, Moskovské Velikokněžstvo, that would later be Russia in here. And they had actually a lot of trade also with Asia, like Constantinople and so on. This looks like more like Italian town, their marketplace. So you see the arcades and so on. Another picture, this looks like from Germany or Austria, from Tyrol lands, even with like description. It's so complicated, it reminded me this Lego. Actually, these Legos are extremely expensive. When I was thinking about to buy some for our Sandra, that was like 400, 500 euros. So incredible, but really exact. Okay, I'm not sure if I have time. 4 minutes, perfect. Because last couple of slides are about what happened in Europe during these early Middle Ages and how it came to be to the point that we are going to talk about Vikings, Slavic principalities, and kingdoms like the others. So we had this fall of the Roman Empire. The successor of them was very powerful and highly developed Byzantine Empire, which is actually Eastern Roman Empire, so Greek-speaking empire. We'll learn about these next lessons. On the ruins of this Western Roman Empire, there were a couple of Germanic kingdoms like Ostrogoths in Italy, these Odoacar, Visigoths in Spain. Both of these kingdoms would later be destroyed. This one just fell apart, but Visigoths, for example, were conquered by Arabs. Vandals in North Africa, of course, dissoluted, just got assimilated. Franks were lucky because they managed to unify many of Gallic, Romanized, or Germanic Alaman, Burgundian tribes, and together they created a big kingdom called Francia, Franska Reich or Frankish Empire. On the other hand, Germanic invaders of to Celtic, Roman or Celtic Britain mixed up into Anglo-Saxon Inuits in something we call Anglo-Saxons. They had 7 kingdoms, later 6 kingdoms, and later on they had to fight Vikings and eventually even Normans of William the Conqueror. And mixture of Normans, a bit of Vikings, and Anglo-Saxons create English, Kingdom of England. During this period, there were big nomadic invasions from Asia. One were Huns, you remember them, and the other Avars. You may know them from that TV show Slovenia on TV Joj, but we will learn about them when we talk about Samos state, Samoarisha. All of these were actually assimilated. They didn't survive like Magyars. During all this period, Slavs were settling in East Central Europe, so our ancestors. And later on, when they were settled down, they start to Christianize. So what I call national kingdoms emerge. Why national? Because many of these countries, again, you cannot see it, but this is France or England or Bohemia or Poland appeared. And they survived for 1000 years and actually provided like basic for language, for development of language, what we call ethno-linguistic evolution or ethno-linguistic development. So this is interesting that these kingdoms survived. So in the maps, what you have in here, sorry for this drill, I believe it's not so bad. Europe in the 6th century, so strong Eastern Roman Empire called what we, as we call it today, Byzantine Empire, kingdoms of Ostrogoths, Vandals, Visigoths, some not ruled, Frankish kingdom being just created, Saxons just invaded this Celtic Britain, youths soon to become Vikings or Norsemen. And these guys, Vikings, Arabic Muslims or Muslim Arabs, and Magyars, as we call this name for study Magyari, we don't call them Hungarians, not yet, but even in English we call this word Magyar, which is good name for them because Magyar language, not Hungarian. So these three ethnic groups, tribal alliances, or empires invaded Europe, and during 9th and 10th century it was really turmoil. Vikings invaded north and west, Muslims attacked the south, and Magyars invaded Central Europe from east, Hungarian nomads in early 900s. All of these invasions caused disorder and turmoil, but once they were either defeated or they just settled down, so suddenly there was short period of peace during which these borders of medieval states could be shaped. So what I mean, Vikings, they were defeated in some countries, or they accepted Christianity and later on were assimilated. I will show you. Magyars, they changed their nomadic life to agriculture, farming land. They accepted Christian faith, and the only thing that made them survive with the language compared to Huns or Avars was that they accepted this lifestyle and Christianity. Arabs were actually stopped in the battles of Poitiers in Francia or Byzantine Empire. So this was different. So this is map of all these invasions of Vikings, and as you can see, Vikings not only explored North Atlantic, they go to America, but they attacked Britain, coast of Francia. They even invaded and plundered some cities, coastal cities of Caliphate of Cordoba, which was Arabic, and even helped Pope to defend this Sicily. So he gave them this land and established kingdom of Sicilies. In Britain, they actually settled down in the north around York, and they just got disillusioned. The same with Danes, Knut the Dan. So they accepted this rule and just mixed up with these Anglo-Saxon, created English language with Normans. Normans themselves, according to their name, were Norsemen who accepted Christianity, accepted French language, and became vassals of the King of France, of West Francia. And this is how they start to speak French. They had names like Tancred and Eric, but they were speaking French. The third generation couldn't speak. They were only happy that they had some like Viking history, but that was all. Magyars, on the other hand, they had great invasions, but once they were defeated by Germans and Czechs, so they came back and they were happy not to be killed like Avars or Huns. So they accepted Christianity and built up a kingdom from the land they conquered of Slovakia, Romania, Croatia, Serbia, and thus they survived and their language managed to survive. Contrary, Vikings here, they knew they couldn't defeat these Slavic peoples, so they were like merchants in here, and they established like trade posts and established Novgorod Republic, Kievan Rus, and many others. Again, the third generation couldn't speak other language than Slavic, Russian, or Ukrainian. So at the beginning of 11th century, we have already states that you can see even today, like England, Scotland, Ireland, slowly growing Spanish kingdoms, France, Germany, upcoming Germany, Bohemia, Poland, at this time even with Slovakia, that was for 20 years of history, Hungary in here, Kievan Rus, and so on. And actually, in other centuries after Mongol invasion, we have Hungary, Poland, Germany still on. France, okay, bad times for them. But already Scandinavia, they had like countries similar to these days. So this is what I wanted to show you and tell you these things about Middle Ages, this introduction. So this funny picture should motivate you, and also how King of Denmark, Valdemar V, is collecting taxes in the Swedish town of Visby on the island of Jotaland that they conquered. So beautiful painting of medieval Gothic period of the early 15th century in here. So thanks for attention. I'm pretty sure I just out of time. 3 minutes, so sorry for that, guys. So be hurry to get to the next lesson. See you next time. Stay negative in test and positive in mind. Bye bye.